It was the last Thursday of April. My mom had cooked her usual pork chops, rice, that green bean casserole nobody actually liked, but nobody had the courage to say so. My dad sat at the head of the table the way he always did, napkin tucked into his collar, already halfway through his second beer. The kitchen smelled like something burning slightly on the stove. Mom always forgot about the rolls, and the overhead light buzzed the way it had been buzzing for 3 months because nobody had gotten around to replacing the bulb. David was telling a story. He does that. My brother always has a story, and it always starts the same way, with him at the center of something impressive and everyone else on the edges watching. So I closed the deal right there in the parking lot, he said, cutting into his pork chop with both hands like he was performing surgery. Biggest quarter the company's had in 2 years. Marcus actually pulled me aside after and said I might be up for a promotion. My dad's face lit up the way it only does for David. That specific glow. Like someone had turned a lamp on behind his eyes. That's my boy, Dad said. He actually said that. Out loud. At 37 years old. Mom smiled and squeezed David's arm. We're so proud of you, honey. I was sitting across from them, stirring rice into my mashed potatoes, quiet the way I'd been quiet at these dinners for years. It wasn't that I was upset. I'd stopped being upset about this a long time ago. It was more like watching a show you've already seen the ending to. You know every line, every beat. You just sit there and let it play. David turned to me with the expression he always wears when he remembers I exist. Not mean exactly. More like polite. The way you'd acknowledge a piece of furniture that had suddenly become slightly inconvenient. How's the tech thing going? He asked. My dad looked up from his plate. He didn't say anything, but his eyebrows did something. A small lift. The kind of lift that says, yeah, how is that going? Fine, I said. It's going fine. You still at that startup? Dad asked. He said startup, the way some people say hobby. It's not really a startup anymore, I said. And then I stopped. Because I'd learned over years of dinners exactly like this one, that the more I explained the less anyone listened. So I just let the sentence end there, hanging in the air like a thread nobody was going to pull. Dad said. He picked up his beer. Well, David's the businessman in the family, I guess. He laughed at his own joke. Mom laughed too. I smiled. I took a bite of rice. I let the moment pass the way I always let them pass. David, emboldened, kept going. Actually, I've been thinking about getting a place. A real place. Something with a yard, maybe. Dad, you know that house on Elm Street? The one next to your buddy Tom? Oh, that one's gorgeous, Dad said, leaning forward now. 3 bedrooms. Good neighborhood. You should look into it. I think I'm going to, David said. He looked at me casually, the way you look at someone when you're about to say something that you don't think will land badly. I mean, at least someone in this family is settling down, right? Mom nodded. He's right, sweetheart. When are you going to think about that? A house, stability, those things matter. When are you going to get a real job, Sarah? Dad said, still half laughing. A job people have actually heard of? He wasn't being cruel. That was the thing that made it hard. He genuinely believed what he was saying. In his mind, a job people had heard of meant something like where he worked. Harwood and Associates. A mid-tier consulting firm with 43 employees and a website that looked like it was built in 2009. But it was steady. It was safe. Paid a pension. And in my father's world, that was the definition of success. I nodded. Maybe someday, I said. And I meant it as a joke. But nobody laughed. We finished dinner. Mom cleared the plates. Dad turned on the television. David checked his phone and said he had to get going. He and his girlfriend were meeting friends for drinks. He hugged Mom, clapped Dad on the shoulder and waved at me on his way out the door. Drive safe, I said. Yeah, he said. And he was gone. I helped Mom with the dishes without being asked. We stood side by side at the sink, her washing, me drying, the way we'd done it 100 times before. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, softly, without looking at me. He means well, you know. Your father. I know, I said. And I did know. That was never the question. That was the last Thursday of April. 5 months later, everything my father believed about me, about what I was worth, what I had built, would be demolished in a single afternoon. Not by me. Not by anything I said or did. Simply by him walking through a door. My name is Sarah Chin. I am 34 years old. I live in a one-bedroom apartment on Maple Street with a couch I bought at a thrift store and a coffee maker that's older than my nephew. I drive a 2018 Honda Civic with 94,000 miles on it. The paint on the back bumper is chipping. When people ask me what I do for work, I say, I work in tech. And then I wait for them to lose interest, which usually takes about 4 seconds. They always lose interest. Because that's what I want them to do. The truth I have not shared with my family in any meaningful way for the better part of 6 years, is this. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Meridian Tech. Meridian is a B2B enterprise software platform. We build the kind of tools that large companies use to manage their data, their workflows, their entire operational infrastructure. We have 280 employees across 3 offices. We were valued at $340 million at our last funding round. We bring in $87 million in annual revenue. Last year, TechCrunch featured us in a roundup of the fastest-growing enterprise platforms in the country. We have clients in 17 states. 3 of them are Fortune 500 companies. I built it from nothing. From a laptop in a coffee shop in 2017, when I was 26 years old and had $4,200 in my bank account. I coded the first version of the platform myself. Every line, every function, every interface. I pitched investors while wearing the same blazer I'd bought at a consignment shop for $23. I worked 16-hour days for 2 years straight. I ate ramen for dinner 4 nights a week. I missed birthdays, missed holidays, missed a funeral for my college roommate's father because I had a pitch meeting I couldn't reschedule. And I told almost no one. Not because I was ashamed. Not because I didn't want to share it. I told no one because early on, back in 2019 when Meridian was still small but already profitable, when we had just closed our first real contract and I was sitting on something that I knew in my gut was going to be significant, I tried. I sat my parents down at this exact kitchen table, the same one where David tells his stories, and I said, Mom, Dad, I think the company is going to make it. I think it's actually going to be big. I remember the exact way I said it. Carefully. With hope. The way you say something when you've been holding it close to your chest for a long time and you're finally letting it out. My dad looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, That's nice, sweetheart. David just got promoted, by the way. My mom nodded enthusiastically. He's going to be a regional director by next year. Isn't that exciting? I sat there for about 5 seconds. And something in me just closed. Not dramatically. Not with anger. It was quieter than that. It was more like a door gently shutting. I smiled, said, That's great for David, and finished my dinner. After that, I stopped trying to explain. When they asked what I did, I gave them just enough to satisfy the question without giving them anything real. I work in tech. I do some software stuff. It's pretty boring, honestly. And they never pushed. They never asked a single follow-up question. Not once. Not in 6 years. Not a single, oh, what kind of software? Or, how many people work there? Or, are you doing well? The concealment wasn't hard. It was almost natural by that point. What was harder was the money. My family had been coming to me for cash for as long as I could remember, and I had been saying yes for almost as long. Not because they asked nicely. Not because the requests made sense. Because I felt guilty. Because somewhere underneath all of it, I still believed that if I was generous enough, if I gave enough, if I was useful enough in the one way they seemed to notice, maybe they'd see me. Not just as the quiet one. Not just as the one who didn't matter. As someone real. My dad's car needed a new transmission in 2021. $3,400. I paid it anonymously, told Mom it was a gift from a friend. Dad never questioned it. Why would he? In his mind, Sarah couldn't possibly be the source. She worked some vague tech job that probably paid barely above minimum wage. My brother needed $1,200 for a security deposit when he moved out of Mom and Dad's house. I Venmo'd it to him on a Tuesday afternoon. He texted back, Thanks. When are you free this week? Mom wants to do dinner. Not a word about the money. Not a question about where it came from. My mom asked for $800 for a dental bill that insurance didn't cover. I sent it within the hour. She called to thank me and spent 11 minutes telling me about David's new car. A used Audi he'd financed through a dealership. Isn't it beautiful? She said. He looks so put together. I don't say this to make them sound like villains. They aren't villains. They're just people who never saw me as someone who mattered. And when you don't see someone as someone who matters, you don't notice what they give you. You just take it. You don't ask where it came from. You don't wonder how they can afford it. You just accept it and move on. By April of this year, I had quietly sent my family a little over $14,000 in the past 18 months alone. Not a single one of them knew where the money was coming from. Not a single one of them had ever asked. The breaking point didn't come with a bang. It came on a Wednesday in early May, 3 days after that dinner. My dad called me at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I was in the middle of a board meeting, the real kind, with investors on the line and quarterly projections on the screen, and my CFO walking through a slide deck that would determine our expansion budget for the next fiscal year, so I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 2:14. I silenced it. He called a third time at 2:31, and this time he left a message. Sarah, it's Dad. Listen, I need a favor. My credit card got declined at the gas station. Long story, don't worry about it, but I need about $600 to cover it. Just send it to my account, okay? Mom will handle the details. Thanks. Bye. He didn't say please. He didn't ask if I could afford it. He didn't say thank you in any real way. He just said it the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. Casual. Unremarkable. Like it was the most normal thing in the world. I listened to the voicemail sitting in my office. My actual office, the one with my name on the door and a view of the city skyline and a framed Forbes mention on the wall from 2022 and a whiteboard covered in product roadmap notes. I listened to it once. Then I put my phone down on my desk and I sat very still for about 2 minutes looking out the window at nothing. And then I made a decision. Not an angry decision. Not a dramatic one. It was the calmest decision I had ever made in my life. I said okay. Just okay. To myself. Quietly. And then I stopped. I didn't send the $600. I didn't call my mom. I didn't send an angry text explaining why. I didn't write a long message listing every single time they had dismissed me, every birthday they'd spent praising David, every dinner where I sat in silence and watched my brother get the spotlight. I didn't do any of that. Because that's not how I work. I don't explode. Stop. I stopped sending money. I stopped answering the request. I stopped showing up to family dinners where I sat quietly and watched my brother get praised for achievements that were, objectively, a fraction of what I had already built. I didn't ghost them entirely. I still answered the phone sometimes. I still said hi. But the money stopped. And the showing up stopped. And the pretending stopped. My family, predictably, did not think I was serious. Sarah's probably just busy, my mom told my dad, according to a text she sent my brother that David accidentally forwarded to me. You know how she gets. They thought it would blow over. They thought I'd come back to the table quiet and compliant the way I always had. Because that's what I had always done. For years. I had shown up. I had smiled. I had handed over money and asked for nothing. And they had come to rely on it without ever realizing it was something I was choosing to give. I had just chosen to stop. They were wrong to think it would blow over. June was when they first noticed something was off. My dad called about a car repair. $1,800 for brake pads and rotors on his sedan. He called me on a Saturday morning, cheerful, casual, the way he always sounded when he needed something. I let it ring. He called Mom. Mom called me. I let it ring again. 2 days later, Mom sent a text. Honey, Dad's car is making a terrible sound. Are you going to help with this? I read it. I typed nothing. I set my phone down and went for a run. The brake pads didn't get fixed for another week. Dad drove the car anyway, the grinding sound getting worse with every mile, the kind of sound that makes you wince every time you hit the brakes. When he finally took it in, he paid with a credit card that was already carrying a balance from a trip he and Mom had taken to see David for his birthday in March. A trip they hadn't invited me to. By July, the pattern was clear. Without my quiet, invisible contributions, the small financial cracks in my family's life started showing up one by one. Mom's credit card bill crept up $200 in a single month. Dad started complaining at dinner about how expensive groceries had gotten, as though the price of lettuce had changed overnight. David texted me once, casually, asking if I could float him $1,000 for a car payment that was due early. He added a laughing emoji at the end as though the request was a joke. It wasn't. I didn't respond to that one either. Meanwhile, my life continued the way it always had. Meridian was in the middle of one of its biggest growth quarters. We had just closed a deal with a logistics company worth $4.2 million in annual recurring revenue. TechCrunch had mentioned us in a roundup article, the kind of mention that gets forwarded around the industry and sits in inboxes for weeks. I had 3 board members asking me to expand into the European market by the end of the year. My head of engineering, a woman named Rachel who had been with me since the very beginning, sent me a message one Friday afternoon that simply said, "We just hit 500,000 active users." I printed that message out and taped it above my desk. I was busy. I was focused. And for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the invisible weight of being the family's quiet, unacknowledged piggy bank. It was in August that the Harwood contract came together. My head of partnerships, Janet Okafor, flagged it during our weekly strategy meeting. She was flipping through inbound inquiries on her tablet. We get dozens every week now, and she stopped on one and looked up. "We've got an inbound inquiry from Harwood and Associates," she said, pulling up their profile on her laptop. Mid-tier consulting firm. 43 employees. They're looking for a data management platform for their client-facing projects. I looked at the name on the screen. Harwood and Associates. My dad's company. I stared at it for about 3 seconds. The room was quiet. Janet was waiting for my input,